Hey y'all, so sourdough discard, one of the biggest questions when starting a sourdough starter. It's always like, what do I do with the discard? Because inevitably when you have a sourdough starter, especially when you want to get back down and ready for a good rise to bake bread, you're going to have some discard that you're going to need to scoop off, do something with it before you refeed your starter and make a really active bubbly starter to make and rise bread or any baked goods that need a good rise and a good lift. So what to do with the discard. I am going to show y'all several recipes throughout this weekend of how we use our sourdough discard. I'll kind of just take you through the weekend with my sourdough starter. Discard recipe is basically any recipe using sourdough starter that does not need a rise. So it can be completely cold refrigerated sourdough starter that's been in the refrigerator for up to a week or so or even more, and you just need to pull some starter off and then re-get your starter nice and bubbly and fed. Let me show you my starter right now. This is Greta. She is actually in she's growing into an active state right now. So I fed her this morning after I pulled off some starter to make these crackers, which I'm about to show y'all, and you see she's almost double back in size. Without further ado, let's jump into some recipes. I'm just going to take y'all through my weekend. I'll talk y'all through some of these, show y'all the recipes that we typically go to for sourdough discard. Stuffed this dough this morning. It's been fermenting in my fridge for about 4 hours now. So it is fermented. I mean, the sourdough starter has taken its role and fermented that flour. There's about around a cup of flour in here that wasn't just from discard. Now you can make sourdough crackers with just sourdough starter, but I found my family does prefer crackers that have a little bit of extra flour in them. I think it gives a little bit of extra fluff. So I'm actually going to chop this and only make half of these crackers today, and we'll have the other half tomorrow or later on this weekend. This will just sit in the fridge. It'll keep fermenting. They'll just get even more sour, even more delicious. These are my kids' absolute favorite snacks. We have them a lot of times at lunch. We're having like spaghetti leftovers today, so I don't really know if crackers go with that, but they're gonna go with it because we love crackers so much. I love to use these with soups just to add a little bit of crunch to our dish. You want to roll them out as thin as possible. I forgot to talk y'all through what's in the actual crackers. You're basically going to take a cup or so of discard, add some chopped butter. I usually use about a half a stick, so four-ish tablespoons, and then around a cup, probably 3/4 cup of flour, and mix that up. Get you a good dough ball. Add some seasonings. I usually just do salt and pepper, like garlic or Italian, whatever I feel like grabbing that day. And then form it into a ball, as you'll see me doing this morning, and then leave it in the fridge for 4 hours up to 24 to 48 hours. I've left these in the refrigerator all weekend before. Like I'll make a batch early in the weekend, leave it in the fridge, and then cook it later that week, and they are perfectly fine. Take a pizza cutter. It's also fun if you have a pretty like sliced cutter, like a fluted cutter. We have one of those I've done before, but I'm gonna give some slices through here. We like a medium-sized cracker. You can do these as small or as big as you want. You can make pretty shapes if you have a nice cutter or a fluted cutter. We have a fancy cutter I've used before, but this is typically what I do. And then to keep them from puffing up too much in the baking process, I just take a fork, poke in each one. Now, I forgot to mention, these are absolutely delicious if you have cheese, and you can add them to the dough in the first mixing when you're first putting together the starter and the flour and the butter. If you add a half a cup or so of cheese, they are delicious. But we don't always have cheese in this house. Pop these in the oven on a baking sheet for 15 or 20 minutes, just until they're crisped up. They'll slightly puff up. Let's get these in the oven and I'll show you what they look like when they come out. Yes, sir. So good.
I like these crunchy crackers.
You like the crunchy ones? Okay, it has been about 6 hours since I fed my starter this morning. So this is active starter. I'm going to use a little bit of this for my biscuit dough that I'm going to be fermenting throughout the day for us to have tonight. And then I'll be left with technically discard because I'm not going to need all of this for the biscuit dough. So I'll show you what I'm going to do with the discard. We're going to be making a peach sourdough skillet. So you're basically just going to take any fruit of choice. I have some canned peaches that we canned this summer. I'm going to mix it with some cinnamon, sugar, cream, and then top it with a sourdough skillet topping. I'll show you all that, but I just wanted to show you what she looks like when she is alive and happy and fed. Let me see if y'all can see her good. The sun is a little bright. So again, she was here when I fed her about 7 o'clock this morning. You see she's more than doubled. Nice and active and bubbly, ready for our biscuit sauté. Okay, so I'm just going to use a cast iron skillet and mix together my filling ingredients, which is going to be peaches. Let them simmer down, thicken up. Then we'll top it with our sourdough skillet. So I'm adding some coconut sugar. You can use any form of sugar. We're just actually out of our regular cane sugar right now. Coconut sugar is not quite as sweet. A bit of cinnamon. Pinch or so of salt. Some cream. I just strained this off this morning from our fresh milk pickup. I'm going to use about 1/4 cup. Delicious already. And then I'm going to add just about a tablespoon of flour, using it to thicken up the base. Now I do that a lot when I make gravies or broth based things. I don't actually ferment the flour that's going in my as my thickener, but it's such a small amount. Don't stress over that. However, if we're eating bread or buns or pie crust or crackers, things that are very bread heavy, I really want those to be fermented because, like I said, unfermented grains can be very harmful to the gut, very harmful to our bodies, very sluggish on our digestion. So that is why we prioritize fermenting grains and why we use sourdough starter so much. Okay, so I pulled off the biscuit sourdough starter just a few minutes ago. I made that dough and it's now fermenting, getting ready for dinner tonight. Here's what is left. So I have a good amount of starter left. Now this is not an amount of starter I would want to keep and keep refeeding. So instead of wasting it or just letting it sit in the fridge, which I could do, but I want to make this dessert recipe. So I'm just gonna use pretty much the rest of this to make the sourdough skillet topping. Whenever you do a refeed for your sourdough starter, the key that I found is to leave a very, very, very minimal amount. I aim for about 30 grams. Irrelevant right now because we're not talking about feeding a starter, we're talking about discard. So I don't want to keep all of this in the jar and have to refeed it next time. So I'm just gonna dump out a good amount, just leaving about 30-ish grams. Now I've done this so many times, I kind of just know what 30 grams looks like left in a jar. And that is what we'll be using to make our skillet topping. Add some baking powder, which is going to help it rise a little bit. Don't need much. Baking soda. Hot melted coconut oil. Probably about a 1/4 to a 1/3 cup. A little bit of butter. Just give it a rough chop. Okay, just kind of mix it until you get somewhat of a dough. Add 1 egg to help kind of liquefy it a little more. A very thin crust on top that will crisp up deliciously when I bake this. I'm making some breakfast sourdough crepes. So you see my starter is been in the fridge overnight. She's still a little bubbly because I fed her yesterday afternoon, but you can do this with completely non-bubbly, non-active sourdough starter. These are delicious. So it's just going to be some eggs, some sourdough starter, milk, salt, and butter. Super simple to make. You fry them up in a little skillet, fill them with whatever fillings you want, cream cheese, preserves, fruit. You can go like savory sausage and cheese. Good Saturday morning. I did not show y'all a recipe Friday, the rest of the day, because I ended up using a recipe that needed a rise. So here is Greta. There is no rise here. We don't need a rise for this recipe. No, this is one of the easiest discard recipes. We're making Dutch baby, which is German pancakes. I cannot think of the word here. It's too early. So basically you're making like a pancake. You're cooking it in a cast iron skillet. It's gonna puff up nicely. You're not spooning and dipping pancakes to cook one by one. It's super delicious. So this is another perfect one to use up a lot of discard. And you do mix this in a blender. You can mix it by hand, but I find it easier to do it in a blender. So it's super hands off, minimal mess to make these. Pour it on top of my melted butter in the cast iron skillet. Cook it in the oven for 15 to 20 minutes, and it's gonna be delicious. I'm gonna make some whipped cream also from my raw cream to go on top. Serve it with a side of fruit, preserves, whatever. You can have it with honey, syrup. All right, we're saving the best for last. Chocolate chip sourdough discard cookies. These are absolutely by far the best sourdough chocolate chip cookie I've ever had. So you basically are making 3 different parts to the cookie. You have 2 wet ingredient parts and 1 dry ingredient parts. And the original recipe where I found this really stressed not over mixing each of the 3 parts when you put it in your mixer. You don't really want to mix air into your cookies. You just want to mix your ingredients just to incorporation. A stick of butter, 100 grams of brown sugar, 100 grams, and I was using coconut sugar here, 100 grams of pure cane sugar, and then some chocolate chips. I love recipes that give you measurements in grams, because then you can just directly weigh your ingredients on your food scale and not have to dirty up extra measuring cups to have to wash. And then mix your dry ingredients. So we have 125 grams of bread flour. I have done this without bread flour and just use all-purpose. Works just fine. You're just giving a little more structure to the cookie by using the bread flour. 95 grams of all-purpose flour, teaspoon of salt, pinch of baking soda and baking powder. You're going to mix that in a little bowl and then add it to the mixer with your wet ingredients. Then lastly, you have your last set of wet ingredients, which is an egg, your sourdough starter, and your vanilla. Now the recipe calls for 125 grams of sourdough starter, which is about half of a cup. I don't ever weigh this. I just dump what I have into the mixer. Just want that sourdough starter to give the moisture to your cookie. You see I have a really dry cookie dough texture before adding the sourdough starter, and then it comes together really well after adding that starter. Lastly, I'm going to roll them into little balls, let them ferment in the refrigerator for the rest of the day. So they're going to get a good 7 to 8 hour fermentation. You can definitely do these overnight or even up to a full 24 hours. If you are gluten sensitive, I definitely recommend fermenting them much longer so that that starter can ferment the grains and make them more digestible for your body. There are many people who have gluten intolerances that can tolerate sourdough starter because of that fermented process that happens here. So you could definitely cook your cookies now. They're delicious. We always sneak a little bites of dough, but they're going to be much more digestible and absorbable and healthier for your body if you let them ferment. This does make a good amount of cookies, so I usually cook half of these that you see here and save the other half, pop them in the freezer after they've fermented, and then I have a quick frozen chocolate chip cookie dough to pull out if I just want to cook 4 or 5 cookies at a time for a little treat one afternoon for my kids. So This is by far one of our favorite sourdough discard recipes, so I hope y'all try this one out.